Hello everyone! Here in this video we're going to look at a nice miniature from Capablanca himself, a former world champion, the world champion in chess from 1921 to 1927. So a very strong player here, definitely a player who is known for his endgame, but also for really understanding the position. So here we'll take a look at a really good example that Capablanca actually shows himself in how to show the power of the initiative in chess. Now, the initiative is a chess term, which basically refers to the power of being able to move, the power to make threats, the power to make forcing moves, and a lot of times this comes from the power to go first. So this video is basically showing why white has an advantage in certain situations. Okay, so in this game here, Capablanca begins with e4, and his, I'll say, quote-unquote, opponent plays e5. And I say quote because we actually don't know who this person was. So I just put no name, an abbreviation at the top here. It is my suspicion that it's actually not a real game. It's just Capablanca himself showing what would happen, in more of like an analysis type style. And the reason I suspect that is because this is way before computers. Capablanca was born in 1888. And well before computers, it was extremely common for high-rated players to analyze games with other strong players or come up with some kind of analysis on their own just to prove a concept. So here we have knight f3 by Capablanca. We have knight c6, very common stuff. And many beginners are about to see this next move here, which is knight c3. And I say beginners specifically because a lot of beginners are taught to develop knights before bishops. And by all means, grandmasters often do this too because it's generally good opening principles. Now, developing your knights before bishops actually is not always true. And if you want a deeper look, you can take a look at an older video of mine where I describe why knights before bishops is actually wrong in many situations. So here they play knight f6 next, which is completely standard, both sides developing their knights. This looks normal so far, and this opening is actually opening theory. It's known as the four knights game, and the only reason it's not played more today is because a lot of grandmasters at the very top level prefer to avoid this because the symmetry more or less speaks to maybe it being more of a draw. It's got a very high draw margin, so they usually want to play more for a win. But it's still a solid opening. And here we have bishop c4, another good move for opening principles, and black does the same, bishop c5. And maybe now you're starting to catch some of the pattern of this, where the whole illustration of this game here is to show the power of moving first. And so what happens if black tries to copy white, literally every single move? Now, so far here, both sides have been playing really good, so I can't blame them. And according to the engine, bishop c5 is actually black's best move here, so you can't blame them for copying if it's the best move, right? Now, white wants to castle because, of course, good opening principles, get their king safe, but black wants to do the same thing, and so they'll castle. And let's continue the symmetry, right? d3 is a nice way, try and get this c1 bishop developed. But black might also think the same and go, well, d6, I'll develop the c8 bishop. And both sides are playing good opening principles so far, but perhaps this symmetrical nature might annoy a lot of players. And this is a really powerful example to kind of commit to memory, just so you have an illustration of the fact them copying you is not something to worry about, because by white moving first, they have a very slight advantage that might become problematic as this game is going to show. So next we have bishop g5, really nice developing move. Of course, we're adding pressure by pinning this knight, so it can't move. They don't want to lose the queen. And so here we have a slight inaccuracy from black, which is them trying to copy. Now, I think better than what they played is to just provoke this bishop with a move like h6 and put the question to the bishop. Now, if they play symmetrical, they'll play bishop c4, as our example shows. Now, I'll just show a real brief line what h6 would look like. If they played a move like h6, yes, you're weakening your king slightly with this move, because now the g6 square here is slightly weaker as the pawn is no longer defending it. But here in this case, I think it's actually equalizing, and not really too bad. It's just a different position, because we can take here, as her bishop was provoked, they take back, but now we can gain time by kicking their queen back with our knight. And of course, if they get kicked back, queen to d8, now we can play very slow and positional and just play a move like c3. And long term, we're going to just prepare to just gain more space in the center with a move like pawn to d4. And then white just has a really nice position, and although I think this is equal, it's a nice imbalance that we can have. But instead of that here, we have bishop to g4, which is also a fine move. And so now we have knight to d5, which is logical. You want to be developing your pieces, you want to be moving your forces more or less forward and controlling the center. It also adds pressure to this pinned knight, so this is something that black should probably have to address. Now here they actually address it by copying. No surprise here, kind of the theme of this game. We have knight to d4, literally move for move doing exactly what white does. And so how are they going to gain an advantage? That we'll see very shortly. So queen d2, which finally we've gotten the queen off the back rank. Our rooks are connected. This is just really strong opening principle so far. So everything looks pretty good from that standpoint. Now, here comes the game decisive blunder, because they're about to play, copying, you guessed it, queen to d7. And so why is this so bad? Well, first let me show an alternative or two that would actually be better, and then we'll show why this move is actually losing. So here for black, I think one alternative that I kind of like is to just play the pawn move c6 and provoke this knight back, because the knight is a really centralized piece, and we want to really just kick it away as black. That way, black can start fighting for more central control. But another idea, of course, that not being the only one, is if black wants to win material, they can actually take this, and this is a check. And so if they take back here, getting rid of the check problem, well, now bishop captures f3 actually wins a pawn. Now, it's not actually completely crushing for black's favor, because there's a really interesting move, which is h3. And it's a bit strange looking at first, because we've just weakened white's king. Why would you advance a pawn right in front of that king? It looks rather exposed. But the idea is this is a really valuable square that white really wants to defend, because this bishop might come back to g4 at some point. The knight might come to g4 at some point. And then probably one of the biggest threats is queen d7, and if that pawn wasn't guarding the square, then of course there would be an immediate checkmate with the queen coming to g2. So a lot of threats that white had to be very careful for. Now in this case, queen d2 can't happen, because queen d2 loses to the very same idea that we're about to see in the game. But h3 was one possible idea. But now let's go back to the queen d7 move and show why this is immediately losing. And the reason why is because the opponent cannot copy forever. Here we have the nice move, bishop captures f6. And this is a good move, okay, sure. Black can copy this, right? They don't have to retake. If they recapture here, then this is going to be immediate fork. I can put it on the board just to illustrate, and the king is in check, but they're also going to lose their queen. So of course they don't want to recapture. But being true to their symmetrical nature, they could just capture this knight, right? And so it doesn't look like they've ruined the symmetry. What's the problem with this? And so the problem is now white has knight to e7 with a check. And so a check, they have to react to this. They have to move their king. The only other move is to give up the queen by capturing the knight, and they really don't want to go down that much material. So king to h8 is the only move. But when that happens, this is actually a forced checkmate in 3. And so it starts with bishop captures g7, a really strong check, because now they cannot go back to g8 because the knight was controlling that square. So they are forced to capture the bishop. And when black king is forced to capture, now comes queen g5 check. And again, the queen is controlling these squares here. This square is still controlled by the knight. The king has only one legal move, and that move is king to h8. So they play king to h8, and then we have a really nice miniature with queen to f6 checkmate. So how did all this happen? Because black was just copying white, and then all of a sudden, almost like a bolt of lightning, they ended up losing. So if you lose this quickly, probably something went wrong in the opening. And so let's go to the critical moment, queen d7, and show why that was a problem. So here the reason this is such a problem for black is because white has one move in their favor, and then black, because they were just copying, they just responded, and they imitated them by playing the same exact thing, right? Like it started. White played e4, black played e5. And the same thing kept happening over and over. But notice that white got the decisive advantage. Why? Because eventually they get to the point where black cannot copy. The opponent cannot keep copying forever. And so what happened was after this point, it comes with a check, something that they must react to. Really at the very beginning of the game, it's not purely symmetrical, right? So eventually the symmetry will be broken. If we take a look at the very starting position, the white queen is starting on d1. If everything was really symmetrical and mirrored, then really the black queen would be starting here on e8. Everything kind of flipped in reverse. But we don't have that here. The queen is on d8, and the queen is opposing each other in the same way that the king is opposing each other. And so basically, you cannot keep copying forever, because at some point there's going to be some move that's a check, and then you have to react to it. Or what's going to happen is one side will be attacking a queen, or the other side will be attacking the king, and then of course there's differences there as well. So basically, you have to be a little wary of that you cannot just keep copying your opponent forever. You have to realize that it's actually not a big deal if your opponent copies you, because that is not a winning strategy. And so you should welcome that. Be like Capablanca, a true chess prodigy. He just learned the rules of chess at age 4. he learned by watching his father play chess, and eventually Capablanca started beating his father, then he started beating everyone else, and as we know, eventually became world champion. So amazing, and if you want to be like Capablanca, then one way to do that is to really understand the power of the initiative in chess. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.